Hey guys, so I'm here today with Toby Street. I've talked him up, but you guys have heard a little bit about his introduction. I've known him for a few years, I think about 5 now. He's from the M&A world, doing mergers and acquisitions, really amazing stuff, but more than that, he's had a journey of self-discovery and really become more whole as a human. It's been interesting to see that side of him, because every time I've interacted with Toby online, he's been a really generous and cool guy to hang out with. So I'm excited to be having this conversation and share a bit about his insights with you guys so you can learn more about his way of life and his journey so far.
Thank you, mate. That was a really nice introduction. I appreciate that.
Oh. So, Toby, for everyone that doesn't know yet, could you give us a bit of background? Where did you start? And what has been your journey over the last... How old are you now, if you don't mind asking?
I'm 30 now, yeah.
30, young guy. So what's the journey been like? Where did you start, and take us through the cycle, I guess?
Well, it's weird because it's kind of one of like many parts, and it's really interesting to kind of look back and think, especially I'm going through so much change right now in so many ways, and I'll kind of come onto that. But when I look back at different parts of my life, it really does feel like I was a different person living a very different life. You know, I look at who I was then and I look at what I was doing, and you know, the question always comes like, well, could I do that now? Like, am I the same person? Could I engage with that in the same way? And the answer is always, a resounding no. So my story starts in West UK. So I was born on a farm, but part of a farming family near Stonehenge, for anyone who can relate to geography in England by Stonehenge. Is quite famous, so usually that's how people recognize it. I grew up with some really good sort of foundational values, if you like, but a lot of limiting stuff too. It was quite a sort of small, insular kind of upbringing in a lot of ways. Had a huge amount of freedom though, as well, because growing up with that much space, with a farm, endless fun outdoors, all kinds of, kind of outdoorsy activities. But I was always kind of asking a lot of questions, and nothing really ever made sense. So I was, the fat kid at school, and I was always kind of struggling to find out how I fit in, because to me, a lot of like who were perceived as popular were just quite cruel, or I received like the kind of cruel end of the stick in terms of like interactions and so on. And I had some bullying and stuff like that as well. It was quite a challenging at times. And nobody would believe me. Well, no one would believe me either, because I was always quite a big lad. And I was always told, you're probably a lot stronger than you think. So, never sort of expel that on anybody. Which was always quite a strange kind of vibe, because inside I was always like, well, I don't want to hurt anyone. And I never felt that way. I was always a lot more gentle, I think, than people kind of gave me credit for. But at the same time, I got a lot of quite interesting feedback from the world. So I kind of grew up in this weird kind of, I guess, headspace of not really knowing where I fit in and not really deeply connecting with that many people or feeling like they got me. And so for me, school never made sense. Very much the kind of person who just sit staring out the window most of the time, and my grades reflected that. But I didn't care that much. It was a funny kind of juxtaposition, I guess, in my head. I didn't really care, but everyone else cared so much that it made me think I should care. And all it did really was kind of crush what I really wanted to do, but I didn't know what that was because of all this kind of noise, if you like, And I think I probably therefore had a bit of a searching or a yearning for finding stillness in life, because I'd never known what that felt like, to just be calm and happy and peaceful with like the now. And that's why meditation and a lot of shamanic practices, all the spiritual stuff that we'll get into, I'm sure, has really played a huge part for me, because it's helped me understand that we can create a life of true freedom that comes from a place of self-love, is probably a nice way to summarize it. A lot of people think, if you just grow a big business, you're going to have the freedom to do what you want. And whilst that's true in some ways, you're also coming into money potentially with a lot of conditions, a lot of perhaps not so positive things from your childhood that actually, when you've got money and all the freedom in the world, it'd be quite nice to have rid of those before you then go and create a cocaine habit or something, but these are the inevitable things, and we see it time and time again. Especially I've, done a bit of work in the city and in M&A and so on, and you just see it over and over again. Hugely talented, full of energy people who unfortunately have been conditioned to a certain kind of reality, they end up in a little bit of a tricky situation down the line, should we say, and it can be avoided.
Just fell down the chair. Yeah, it's a huge juxtaposition, like you said, juxtaposition there. Like, talking about slowing down, but I think in your career path, you really would have, I'm assuming you would have had to amp up and go at quite a fast pace, at least for some time in your life.
To a degree, yes. Well, I'm kind of lucky in the sense that I've never really been employed. So the only real time I had that I was employed was about 10 months in 2 different jobs in 2013. Well, 12, 13. Yeah, that would be about right. So, and 14 actually, so 13, 14, that makes a lot more sense. And they were both in the sort of family office space in London, in Mayfair. And it was an amazing opportunity to learn what really happens with the super wealthy. I mean, we had a board. One of the companies that I ended up becoming a director of was a company that basically helped family offices and wealthy people connect with advisors, so high quality people that can actually genuinely care about them and advise them. Because one of the biggest things that money does is it turns people into, well, it brings out all the good stuff and the bad stuff. So whilst you may be very generous, you might also be a thief, So there's a lot of things that kind of come to the surface, and these guys wanted to create a platform that would enable wealthy people to find out who to really trust through recommendation and so on. And that enabled us to network and kind of, get to know and kind of really connect with a lot of very wealthy people. And to the point where we had a board of 5 advisors at one point, 2 of whom were billionaires in their own right, one of whom came from a multi-billion pound family, and then 2 others were advisors or CEOs of family offices that advise billionaires. So we had the most ridiculous level of kind of support and wisdom around us in terms of how to deal with these people. But
this would have been what, 20, 23, 24 at that point? 25?
Yeah, 24, 25, I think, yeah.
Okay, so that's I'll just leave that spot there, because that's a massive learning experience, I'm assuming, by itself, but let's step back a little bit, because you said from high school you weren't interested in in really doing much in high school. So was there a reason for that, and how do you go from not really being interested in schooling to working with some incredible people at what is quite a young age? Yeah.
Haphazardly is probably the best way to put it. There was certainly no design to it, these days I've got a lot more kind of awareness of what's going on, but no, I mean, literally bashing around and kind of, so I'm very kind of a feeling person, I kind of feel my way through life. I try and use my logic in my head, but if I use it too much, life always slaps me and goes, no, come back to your heart, come on, you're being stupid. And it always does it in a really humbling, sobering way, and it's done it over and over and over again. And my biggest lesson in life has literally been, well, how do I become more soft to that intuition? How do I become more soft to the real messages that are being shown to me, plain as day, if I'm open to them? And back then, I definitely didn't have that sort of tuned in quite so much. Basically, so from out the gate, I was lost. So I kind of left school at 18, having not done very well, but loved the sports and loved the friends that I connected with, and really truly found some lifelong friends. A few people who I've no doubt at all will be friends forever. But the kind of overwhelming sense that I had throughout school was that I didn't really belong there, and that there had to be some other kind of reality going on that I could be living that would be more in tune with who I was. But there was no signaling for it. There was nothing around me that was kind of showing me anything, particularly at the time, or not that I was open to or aware to. Because, we get taught, this is life, this is what you do, you crack on. So as soon as I left school, as I said earlier, I did I perhaps it was on the other call, I did some labouring. So I learned very quickly that working for money was not a good idea. It was exhausting, and the highest earner, I think, in the firm, not to kind of put shame or anything on whatsoever. It's a huge, I learned so much through working with them. But, you know, when the top goal in the firm was £12 an hour, I think, and this is back in 2007, 2008, it's hard to get excited about that when it's so fucking hard work and everyone's like, it's good banter, but it's really challenging. You know, it's a lot of hours, and you don't get time to think about much else. And then I learned from my parents, who were both self-employed, that being self-employed wasn't necessarily the best way to go either. They both worked really very long hours and a lot. And we never had much in the way of spare money. They put all of their money, thankfully, into beautiful homes, which I'm super grateful for. And we never had much to do much else with, so we never really went on holidays or anything like that. And they also spent a lot of money putting myself and my brother through private school, which I don't think they could really afford, which again I'm super grateful for, because I think it was a much kinder environment in a lot of ways than a state school could have been. But for me, none of it just made sense. So I was constantly looking for, and from as soon as YouTube came on the scene, I was looking for like inspirational videos and motivational videos and all the classic stuff. As soon as Tony Robbins was on YouTube, I was on it, you know, I was listening. But at the same time, the version of these human beings that I was seeing, it was like, how do they have so much energy? How are they so good looking? How are they this? How are they that? And I just didn't feel like I could ever be one of them. But at the same time, I was like, well, it must be the right kind of information. It's interesting. So I was always looking for, well, how is this person living? And are they like, how do they show up with so much love and happiness and, you know, all these different things? So once I'd kind of figured out that the institutional route, if you like, wasn't for me at all, I went traveling, came back, bashed around a few different jobs in restaurants and things like that for a while. And then weirdly, my mum and I had the same dream one night, and I came down in the morning. I was still living at home at this point, although I had lived somewhere else with a girlfriend as well. And we'd had the same dream, and that was, you should be a personal trainer. And I'd always kind of been in the gym a bit. I'd always kind of wanted to, you know, kind of look decent, although I was always carrying a lot of extra padding, should we say. But and that was not something that I sort of seemingly couldn't help at the time. Yeah, we had the same dream, and it was kind of obviously a weird thing to do. And also I wasn't sort of always that interested in fitness or in health or anything like this, but it felt like a good thing to do. So I ended up going and doing a personal training course, realizing that there were some limits to that industry at the time. I think now that industry offers huge opportunities for people, but at the time it was, and with my knowledge of business and so on, it felt quite limiting. And also there was a lot of people who were just way better shape than me, and I kind of just felt a little bit out of place. You know, I felt like a bit of a fish out of water. And so that didn't last all that long, but it gave me a lot of understanding of what contributes towards health. So that was that phase. At the same time, or round about the same time, I met my now again business partner, James Downton, in a gym down in Cornwall. And we ended up just kind of hitting it off. We were both very ambitious. We both wanted a lot more than what we were sort of being offered by life right now. So we were kind of asking the same sort of questions about life. And that felt really good, because it was like, oh my God, down here in Cornwall, which is where my folks moved after I left school, there are some people that I can actually connect with, and I'm not alone here. So James and I got on really well. We ended up we did the kind of classic 19-year-old thing, trying to make money with internet marketing. And then the property circuits in the UK were just kind of kicking off at the time. So there was all these new property events that we could go to, and we're like, we should start up a property event. So we tried that as well. But, you know, it was all kind of young, dumb, and, you know, all the rest of it. So, but at the same time, it introduced us to a lot of people. And I think at the time, even though we didn't know that much, we were so kind of ambitious, and I think some of that energy kind of rubbed off on people, and we ended up getting invited to all kinds of things that perhaps we, you know, weren't necessarily due, but because we just had loads of energy and we wanted to learn from people, we were super open to learning from people that could teach us anything. We were welcomed in a lot of areas with open arms, which was really cool, and it enabled us to really up level our thinking quite quickly, I think. So instead of going straight into property, for example, and trying to figure out how to, you know, buy a house, do it up and sell it, we go in with all these new tools and strategies that perhaps were quite advanced, but we were able to then have conversations and do deals that were, a bit of ahead of our time. So that was definitely an up level in thinking. We also ended up working up in Newcastle in the UK with some guys who'd raised 100 million to buy student properties, and that then took us into this new realm of other people's money,
just
harnessing.
To, I guess, phrase it, that's your first taste of success there? Were you working with James doing this whole property thing?
Sort of. So James and I were very much, we never really built the systems underneath businesses. So we were very much feast and famine. We'd do a property deal, we'd have loads of money in the bank, we'd spend it in 6 months, and then we'd like, oh shit, we need to do another one of those deals. But what else do you do when you're 20? It's like, it's the classic, and it was fun. I'm not gonna lie, we had a lot of fun. But it wasn't overly. It also didn't satisfy this kind of longing that I was having in my life. From the start, I sort of said, I never really felt that at ease in life. Nothing really ever felt that good. Didn't matter if it was like the most insane party at a friend's house, or being with somebody who I was in a relationship with. Nothing was quite satisfying me, and it was because I hadn't really found out what was going on for me. So yeah, that experience very much taught us then about what was possible with other people's money. And although these guys actually never went on to kind of execute what they wanted to, and we therefore never made the kind of money we were supposed to helping them, we again learned an awful lot. We spent time with people who had, Harvard degrees and experiences in whole other realms of business that we couldn't fathom until actually having these conversations. And they were, again, really generous with their time, and they'd sit with us and say, lads, ask us questions. What do you want to know? So we'd just sit there and we'd just quiz these guys and ask whatever we could think of, and they'd be totally honest with us. And they'd tell us things that perhaps they shouldn't have told us as well, which just felt like, wow, they trust us. Like, that this is a really cool thing. And it just goes to show really what's possible when you just show up with a smile and a lack of neediness, but a willingness. You don't need what they have to give you, but you really want it. There's a big difference. What happened after that? Where did we go? Oh, we then moved. So this whole time, James had an online jewelry store. So he was kind of quite au fait with building sites and graphics design, and also a little bit of internet, the sort of marketing side of it, the advertising side of it. And so we moved to London, having also now connected with a lot of you'll probably know these names like Saj P and Shakir Hussain, those guys, the sort of internet marketing crew from the UK.
I'm not entirely sure of the UK scene. I know like Mohammed and those guys.
Okay, yeah. So some of that kind of crowd, but we sort of started getting in with them a little bit, and a classic back then was going for a shisha on Edgware Road with the internet marketing gang.
It seems to be a very UK thing, the whole Arab kind of mix.
What it is. Well, I think there's a huge influence in London, and there's a lot of wealth around it. So I think it was probably just a little bit like bees to honey kind of thing. Yeah, that was great fun, and that again taught us a lot. It taught us a different kind of business. It was a lot about lifestyle and lifestyle leverage and how to optimize your time, and we learned a lot from those guys, and they all had huge hearts. They were all so generous with what they knew, and they were all on their own journeys, and still are. Some of those guys are absolutely killing it these days. So that was a kind of new phase. And what we did, though, what we saw, if you like, as an opportunity from that environment wasn't necessarily to kind of imitate what they were doing or do what they were doing, but it was more to see how we could, having kind of worked with businesses already, we were, I guess, a little different in our thinking, which basically said to us, well, how can we do this for businesses? How can we actually create something that's an agency and will... For some reason, we were always thinking about equity, but maybe give us the opportunity to get equity in businesses down the road, or at least I was at the time, still thinking about equity at that point. That we ended up then inviting somebody else into our business to help us scale it. He had a very large corporate background and some success as an entrepreneur as well. We were in partnership with him for probably about a year or so. And again, that time was a time of learning. All of these experiences haven't really yielded all that much, but because we just kind of went in head first, we learned what we needed to know. And although it may have hurt and was probably quite, well, in terms of remembering. It was quite challenging at the time and quite depressing at times, for me especially. I was feeling it at times, shall we say. It never took very long for me to look back on something and go, you know what, actually that happened for a reason. That needed to happen. I needed that kick in the bollocks, basically. This agency ended up being the same kind of thing. A year later, I was back out on my own, kind of having to do my own thing. And in fact, this kind of tunes in a little bit to the more spiritual stuff. That after that happened, or I'll tell you the story. That was one of the kind of pivotal moments in my life where I realized, hold on a minute, there's something with this spiritual flow connection thing. And so what happened was, I was with a girlfriend. We were living at her mum's because she had also had some really massive business failures, but challenges just before she met me as well, and also some major health stuff. And we got together at a really interesting time. I was coming to my wit's end with this particular business. She had literally just come out of hospital, having had something very, very challenging health-wise. We connected on a night out with some mutual friends in the kind of business growth, personal growth type space.
Just take that. How old are you this time?
So I'm 23 probably at this time.
Okay.
23, 20, yeah, something like that. And she sort of saw what was going on for what it was, and she said, I think this would be a good idea to start afresh. And so together we kind of made the decision that I was going to do something different, which felt very empowering, but quite kind of intimidating at the same time. I'd always been in partnership with people or whatever, and this was like, you're going to go on your own. And looking back, I wasn't ready for it at all. I didn't know enough about who I was and have confidence in that. So, but the situation that happened was, she was actually away on business in the States. And we had I'd been probably on my own for maybe a couple of weeks at this point, or a month, and nothing was really going that well. Everything was quite hard work. And we were living with her mum in way out West London near the M25. And she was away in the States. Her mum was a teacher, and so she was out at work. And I ran out of money in London. Just my cards didn't work. I had like 80 quid or 100 quid cash on me or something, and that was it. And I tried everything. I tried calling my bank and saying, could you extend my credit a little bit? And then they asked me a bunch of questions about my income, and I was like, and then they reduced my credit, and just bullshit was happening all around me. And I went, you know what? This is an opportunity to just go fuck the day. And it was about 2:00 in the afternoon, and I went, I'm going to go home. I knew the house would be empty. I knew I could clear my head. And it was about a 50-minute tube journey on the Piccadilly line, if you know London's tube lines. And it took me that entire time, but when I got off the train, my head was so clear, and all I'd done was just kept running through things in my head. And I have this horrible habit, which I'm actually now learning not to do, but it's been very beneficial, which is to think of the worst possible case scenario and get okay with it. So like, what's the worst that could happen in this situation? Like, bring up all of my potential fears, like, whether it's in a relationship or whether it's, with a business or whatever, what's the worst that could happen? And then get okay with that energetically. And by the time I got off the train, I felt great. It was about another 10-minute walk back to the house. And again, on that walk, I just cleared my head. And then what happened over the coming 5 days was, I'd obviously now run an agency. We grew it to about 30 odd clients in a year. And although it wasn't giving us the lifestyle yet, it was starting to become quite successful. So I knew how to help people, and I knew how to guide people with, digital creation and so on. And I had 2 clients come in, as consulting clients, and a full-time job offer with a significant basic and huge, potential earnings. And it was, in the family office space, which was totally random, but I'd randomly connected with this woman. And instead of trying to sell her anything, all I did when I sat down with her for a meeting is I just tried to help her. And I said, well, you could do this and you could do this. And she had this online platform. And I was like, right, well, if you change that to that, and I just started to help her. Yeah. And the day afterwards, she gave me a call and she said, listen, I've been looking for a new business development director and I really want to work with you. What's it going to take for me to get you, at least partially full time? Not part time, but between part time and full time.
Yeah.
And I gave her a figure, and I gave her some hours, and I also gave her a bit of a kind of, I guess, a lowdown on how I expect to be sort of treated. I'm not your typical 23-year-old or 24-year-old, whatever I was at the time. I've done quite a lot for my age, so give me a little credit. And then comes the beginning, I guess, of the journeys of real self-awareness and self-empowerment, because what I didn't realize is that basically every human in the world is walking around with their own stories, their own kind of their own juxtapositions, as we were talking about earlier. And most people haven't gone on that much of their own personal spiritual journey to really uncover where these are coming from. And the woman I was working with, she was wonderful. I really had an awful lot of time for her as a human being. And her story, if you like, was as a very high-powered lawyer within firms, having created teams in firms that have gone on to win awards and so on. So she had this huge career, had made significant money doing it, and was still what I would call an entrepreneur. She'd never taken the full steps, if you like, to take on all the responsibility of a business. She'd only ever done it within a safe structure, with a budget and with a team given to her and so on. And the longer we went on in our relationship, which ended after about 6 or 7 months, the more I saw this within her and saw how unable probably the best way to put it is how unable I was actually to communicate the result that I was looking for. I was still too young and immature, if you like, at the time. Even though I knew the answers, I didn't know how to tell her in a way that was kind to her and allowed her to learn how I came to that conclusion. I did not have that level of vocabulary or eloquency at that point. It ended with me, well, actually it ended with her telling me to shut up on a conference call, to which I said, fuck off, put my earphones on the laptop and grabbed my stuff and left, and then had one of the most crazy panic attacks outside you can imagine, just because of the adrenaline of doing that. I'd never done anything like that before, but it felt hugely empowering and kind of scary. But I dined up, a friend of mine was the CEO of a family office, and he had a portfolio company that needed a sales director. So literally the next day, well, as I walked outside, I gave him a call and said, when can you get me an interview? He got me an interview the next day, and I started. I think I went on a rally with my brother throughout Europe at that point in time. And when I got back, I kicked that off. Is that? I think that might have been afterwards, actually. But either way, yeah, I had a little bit of a break and then kicked. But again, that was
did you have a taste for the family offices, or what made you come back to that space instead of going to agency world?
Yeah, good question. I think, a little bit, like I said earlier, really, with the kind of internet marketing crowd gravitating towards the West End of London, and especially sort of Edgware Road area, there was a lot of Asian and Arab money there, and a lot of those guys kind of came from those origins. And for me, Mayfair, I guess, was the pinnacle of... Hello?
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me? Hello? I'm here.
Hello.
I can hear you.
Sorry. Let's start again.
Toby?
So, so I ended up in this, this place of being surrounded by these amazing people and knowing that I was kind of capable in some way of working with them, but, having nowhere near the experience or the assets or anything really that's going to actually enable me to do that, which is what, they're kind of looking for. But the connections were and still are incredibly valuable in so many ways to me. A couple of those guys kind of, the guys who were on the board of the first company that I worked for, are still good friends. They're still kind of advisors and mentors to me. And actually now that I've gone on much more of a spiritual and kind of health journey, they're now asking me for my advice on things and how to kind of live life in a more sort of free and abundant way in all ways, as opposed to just the financial way, which has been quite kind of interesting to feel happen as well. When you go through that kind of transition where suddenly the people that you thought were there just for you to learn from suddenly start asking you for advice on things, which has been really, really cool as well. So that really kind of set me up. Those two experiences, having employment in this environment, it really set me up for being able to relate to people who have the responsibility of significant wealth. I think that's what a lot of people never really understand, is that when you do create abundance in that way in life, it's a huge responsibility, because it's very easy to be very ruthless with it, or very careless with it, or very indulgent with it, or all these things, and I think, to some degree everyone goes through all of those phases. You see things for what they are eventually, and then it's about something more. And then really the journey with Jeremy Harbour started, which is obviously probably around about a year or so after we connected, I'd imagine. I think I went into business with Jeremy just over 4 years ago. And for those of you who don't know Jeremy, he's kind of a global authority on small and medium business mergers and acquisitions. He's done over 50 deals himself and advised on 200 or 300 more. He's really...
It's a bit.
He's one of these guys who's really done it fully. Like, he has been in the trenches. He was the guy who, when he had a telecoms company, he was being approached all the time from people who wanted to buy him, but they were never going to give him any money, and it was all based upon what the business was going to do. So he kind of just in his head went, well, I haven't got any money either, so I'm going to give it a crack too. And he learned just through kind of falling over how to have conversations with business owners when he didn't have any money, but he wanted to buy their business. And he eventually did deals and ended up scaling that company very, very quickly just through acquisitions. And I guess it's kind of jaded his way of seeing business now, in that he solves all problems by just buying another company that does the thing that he's having a problem. But it's an amazing skill set, and he really is a master. And so I think being in the environment that I was in with him and spending a lot of sort of one-on-one time with him, he's got a beautiful home over in Mallorca, and I've spent probably a lot more time than I should have done over there over the last sort of 4 years or so, but it's been amazing just to kind of hang out with that guy and really understand. He's also, a high net worth individual in his own right. So he's kind of had the capital events, the big money windfalls, and then had the opportunity to really step back from life and go, well, hold on, I don't have to do anything now. So I'm going to make every single one of my decisions that much better because of this. And he lives life based on those principles, really. It's about, what I guess feels good to him, but also what's the most impactful use of his time and his resources. And he helps people create the same thing. And so, and he runs a course on this too, on buying and selling companies and so on. And also some of the lifestyle stuff too, so that you can really set yourself up for being wealthy. And I think hanging around with somebody like that for 4 years really does upgrade your level of thinking. And because we were I keep forgetting sometimes it's not just us having a chat. We're talking to people who perhaps have no idea who I am. We end up creating something which is very much Jeremy's kind of baby, if you like. It's his life's work, and it's called the agglomeration model. And it was basically a way for, having worked with so many SMEs throughout his career, and myself as well, one of the biggest challenges is access to resources for small and medium growing businesses. Not so much when you're an internet business alone, but when you're more of a bricks and mortar business, having access to resources, and especially capital, is crucial. And there's a few kind of biggest moaning points for all business owners, and that's that they never actually feel, even if their business is worth millions, they never actually feel like a millionaire, and they never quite get to living the life that they thought they probably should be able to at this point. But it's also time freedom and so on. So we basically help, through this agglomeration model, we help small and medium businesses leverage public markets to release equity value and provide a much better valuation for that equity. There's a lot that happens to value of a business when you increase the liquidity in it and the scalability of it. And it also helps investors then gain access to probably the most underutilized market in terms of investments on the planet, which is SMEs, and classically because they are risky and illiquid. So people don't know when they can get their money out.
Now, as much as you and I have discussed it before, can we take us right back to the 5th grader level? What does that all mean?
Yeah, so basically it's a way for small and medium businesses to benefit from the same things that much larger businesses can benefit from. So, for example, in a bid, in a building contracting sense, for example, a scaffolding company can only bid for projects that are worth less than 30% of their total revenue. So if you're only doing a couple of million a year, you can only really bid on things up to sort of $500,000 in value, which could be quite limiting if you're a bit more of a visionary and you've got some real, you really believe what can happen for your business, and you've created a model that's gaining huge traction and you're getting loads of inquiries, etc. But they're keeping you on this kind of low-level run rate. So if you then join a public company and suddenly you've got a balance sheet, with 10 million of assets on it, and you're part of a collective group that does 50 million in revenue or 20 million in revenue, suddenly you have a lot more weight and you can go after much larger projects and use the balance sheet of the group, for example, and the resources of the group to help deliver it. And then you also are part of a collective who are all there for the same mission, which is to ensure that the share value is always increasing through collaboration, through acquisition, and through the a degree of centralization, i.e. if you both got two very similar finance departments, then match them, but nothing enforced. So it's all about the individualism of those businesses still too, just with access to a lot more help. And we do this through public markets because public markets classically value equity much more highly. And the two reasons for that are that they're much more scalable. A public company is a lot more scalable than a private one on the whole. And through liquidity. So you can buy and sell shares, and therefore you can get your money out quickly if you don't want it in there anymore. And that's very attractive to investors. This whole journey, though, took me personally on a hell of a journey within myself as well, because age, what was I,
24, 25 at the time? 24,
25, yeah.
23, you got into the family operations, and you said met Jeremy, and where did Jeremy come from? Did he come from the family offices, and you met each other?
So I'd actually been following him for a little while. So Jeremy's somebody who has educated more people in the sort of small business helping space than you probably know. He's one of the kind of secret weapons, if you like, of a lot of people, because the strategies that he uses aren't taught. This is all M&A stuff. This is bigger stuff usually than just business growth. And so a lot of people have been on his courses that you probably know, but they don't necessarily talk about it, although Jeremy's now kind of expanding his sort of social media profile and so on a little bit as well. But we met because I was following, a friend of mine had done his course and raved about it on Facebook. And then I jumped on Jeremy's newsletter and just find it fascinating. The thing that really clicked with me was that I felt a little bit like him when it came to business. I wasn't really all that passionate about any particular industry. I just loved business, and I love the creation of things, and I love marketing, and I loved understanding what it is that people are going to go for when you put a new offer together and things like this. So for me, Jeremy's whole perception of this, which is very much more on the deal making side, was like a whole new dynamic to this world of small business, which removed any need to be really good at one thing, in one industry.
Would you say it's right, in a way?
Well,
or it's a way of expressing yourself in the world.
It certainly is for him. I think my personal art is shifting constantly, and we'll come on to kind of how that's looking now as well. But that it's very much Jeremy's art. I mean, when you're in a negotiation with him, and I've sat around, I don't know how many boardrooms with Jeremy in deal talks with him and other parties, when you listen to the way that he understands the challenges of who he's talking to, and therefore what they're going to be thinking, and therefore what solutions are going to put them at ease, it's like listening to any master at anything. When you listen to somebody who's amazing at selling anything, it's phenomenal to hear them articulate things. And again, that just taught me so much about, one, the needs of the small business, because he'd been in the game for such a long time and bought and sold so many businesses. He really understood, what it was that the person sitting opposite him was challenged by or fearful of. But also how to create solutions for them. So we ended up working together because I think I commented on something of his on LinkedIn, and then he looked at my profile and saw that I'd worked with a lot of high net worth people. And he actually, at the time, was raising money for a project of his out in Bali. And he basically said, do you think you can raise me some money if you're in London? And I gave it a go, but raising money for a project in Bali in London was nigh on impossible. But I raised a little bit of money for him. But it got us kind of talking. And I think he also grew up on a farm. He grew up in Dorset. I grew up in Wiltshire, the neighbouring counties in the UK. We went to schools, actually. He's 10 years older than me, but we went to schools that would have competed against each other in sports and things like that. So we had a lot of the same kind of upbringing mentalities and, impacts and so on. There's a lot of sort of similar things to our story. And we just got on. So when he was he never really partnered with anybody because he's very much a lone wolf, Jeremy. He's very, very, very action orientated. So he just cracks on and does stuff and he'll leave you behind basically. So he never really partnered with anybody, but he kind of said to me, listen, I want to do this kind of bigger thing. I don't know what it really is yet. And this is what became the agglomeration. To begin with, it was just kind of an amalgamation of his thoughts and a little bit of my insight. I won't take credit for very much of it because I don't think I did add all that much to it in the earlier stages. But he'd done so many deals where, well, the biggest thing that he'd done was he had an events company, I think it was, that came over from the US to the UK, and they were looking for events companies to acquire. They were a public company, and they were looking to scale internationally. And unfortunately at the time in the UK, there wasn't anything that was big enough for them. They needed a minimum run rate and they needed a minimum number of staff and all these sorts of things. And a minimum number of customers. And so Jeremy basically put 3 together into a holding company and said to them all, do you want to play a bigger game? Do you want to be part of something a bit special? And do you want to then have access to all these other resources that this huge other company is going to give you? You're not going to have to change your branding or anything. You just crack on as you are. You're just going to have the benefit of a lot of really wise people, and a whole load of resources. And so we managed to get 3 together to make something that was big enough and did it's called a reverse takeover or reverse exit into this public company. And made a massive commission, if you like, in doing so. And yet he never actually owned any of these businesses. So he just structured the deal and sold it into this public company. And then he started to realize, well, hold on a minute, actually this goes on all the time, just at a much bigger level than what most people are playing at. So hold on, let's see what's really going on in the world. And he started to research the banking sector, and that enabled him to go on and buy a bank in Texas, because he's understood how the banking sector is structured and how fractional reserve is basically a way to print money and then own everything. Yeah, you get a lot of insight. But the whole kind of, I guess, journey for me showed me what was possible when you really know your shit, when you have resource behind you, when you have time freedom in life, and when you get to use creativity in business. Like I've not been with someone before that never, ever, ever even once tried to run the business. He hired people always to help run things. And I learned a lot through that as well. And perhaps I learned an awful lot as well of how to improve upon what we were doing as well. But also just, I don't know, I guess the experience more so just being around people who take so much action so quickly and make stuff happen. We ended up creating a company which, from inception, was about 18 months to then being listed on a bit less than that, 14 months to then being listed on a public company at a valuation of 14 million. And then within 3 months, it had a valuation of 275 million, and a run rate of 20 million a year. So yeah, it was an extraordinary journey, but then
I think you posted about this or we discussed this at some point. The metrics one that just blew my mind. How do you go start a company, take it to that point, and then multiply the value by such an exponential rate?
Yeah. Well, this is the magic of M&A combined with public markets. And also telling a good story. And I don't mean that in like a manipulative way. I mean it in a really sincere way. You know, we were very, very good on stage in front of investors. So myself and Jeremy did a number of presentations to a very, very IPO hungry crowd over in Sweden. And it's really hard to kind of talk about it because you then know what happened, and we had a really challenging time. The reality of that challenging time was not what it looked to these investors. But the early stages, basically, I'll come into that in a second, but the early stages, all we really did was we packaged it well, and then we sold it well. And we also then had, because of Jeremy's network in running harbour clubs, a very, very wide network of deal makers all over the world. So we would literally just put the word out and say to them, hey, listen, we're looking for companies in this sector. To begin with, we were trying all kinds of different sectors before marketing ended up becoming the one that we actually put some, getting listed. But really, it came from a kind of, the components of all these things. I also did some training with some of those guys who were effectively sourcing deals with us. And I think that really helped a lot of them to have much more high quality conversations and so on. And really, we just scaled something. We looked at all the various components of what we would need, which would be investment. So we're always talking to investors, businesses. So we were building our network of deal makers and always talking to businesses. Daily, we were having multiple conversations with business owners about acquiring them. And then the ops side. So actually, what do the mechanics look like of doing this many deals? What does our team need to look like? And that was ultimately where we probably didn't build the right business. But we also ended up then doing a deal, which ultimately became the demise of that success story, or that part of TMG's success story. Company's called TMG, the marketing group, by the way. Because we ended up doing a deal with somebody who, quite literally pulled the rug out from under our feet. It was called a bear raid for anyone who's in the space and understands that model. But basically we did a deal with them whereby we borrow against some of our shares that they then hold as collateral. And we were supposed to borrow a certain amount over a period of 3 or 4 months. And they gave us a smaller amount than one, month's worth should have looked like. And then we noticed a very large seller in the market, and it didn't cross our minds that it could be this party to begin with. But eventually there was no one else left. We'd kind of spoke to everybody and kind of gotten to the bottom of things and gone, well, actually, no, it has to be them. And that was then confirmed when we got the end of the month, stockholders report. And that was quite sobering, because these guys had a huge number of shares, because we were doing much bigger deals. We were growing so quickly and everything was going so well, and the model was really showing itself to be something that had real legs, that we were really attracting a much higher level of investor. So we're having conversations now with institutions and so on about helping us get to 500 million and $1 billion in market cap. And we were having conversations with companies that were much bigger. So some of these guys were doing 10, 20, 30, 40 million a year in revenue. And therefore the cash components, which is what we were raising money for, the cash components of their deals, to either take out a little bit of debt in their businesses or to help them on their growth journey, whatever that looked like, was quite a lot more significant and going into the multiple 8 figures. So we were playing a very new game at this point, and none of us came from the city. So I don't think we quite realized, just what we were dealing with the city, and how many people are not quite so, shall we say, true to their word as they perhaps could be.
This is where it's starting to sound very ruthless.
Yeah, well, we got a taste of just how ruthless the city public markets, and it really is. I mean, it's kind of the failing of capitalism, really, when everything is about money and it's no longer about people or the quality of a delivery of a product or a service or something like that. When it's suddenly only about the money, you're facing some really big conflicts with morality and so on. And unfortunately that attracts a certain kind of mentality or a certain level of maturity as well, I think, because, looking back, it's just fascinating to observe some of the conversations that we had. It basically crashed around our ears. And I guess the biggest challenge that we had, that while this was happening, because it was our shares that we're doing this deal with, it looked like we were the sellers. So the entire marketplace was pointing the finger at us. And we literally had, all of our Twitter followers and Facebook and all kinds of things, like people hurling abuse at us. My private PMs on all these platforms was full of abuse. And there was nothing that we could do about it because it's public company stuff. We can't disclose anything. So if there's stuff going on behind the scenes, you're not allowed to tell, the public, what happened. And the police were saying we couldn't say anything, and all the lawyers were saying we couldn't say anything. And so we were literally hands sort of tied behind our backs, waiting for the bottom, really, or waiting for somebody to let us actually say something, which happened, I think, not until May last year. So this all kicked off in like October, November 2016. We listed in June 2016, and by October, November, we were facing some real challenges because of this toxic debt deal. And it wasn't until May, I think it was May, that Jeremy was actually allowed to put out a tweet, which I then shared on Facebook and so on as well.
We were kind of chatting before that then. When all this was happening, it was just when really heavy with you at that point because just so much shit happening.
Well, do you know, it was a really interesting period of my life because I think there's an eternal optimist in every single entrepreneur, and I'm probably not the best definition of an entrepreneur either because I'm probably not quite as commercial in a lot of ways as a lot of entrepreneurs are. I'm a lot more sort of, I have to be doing stuff that feels really good, you know? And
this is when you got the car too, the first time, right? Just before that.
Yeah. So I had to get a couple of toys, obviously. So yeah, there's another RC there, of course. When all this was happening, so this kind of takes me into the sort of spiritual side as well. It was September 2014, which was about 3 months after Jeremy and I kind of connected properly as well. I did my first ayahuasca ceremony, and for anyone who doesn't know what ayahuasca is, it's a psychedelic plant. I'm sure you've spoken to people about it before.
DMT, etc.
Yeah, and it takes you on the most fucking batshit crazy journey into yourself. I'll finish that part of the story first, because having done quite a lot of ayahuasca at this point, when all this shit was going on in 2016, I was kind of looking at everything going, well, this isn't great, but it's happening for a reason. Like, there's something that, as a collective in this organization, we haven't yet learnt, and there's something personally that I haven't yet learnt and shared with other people. So let's just keep going through it, whatever it looks like. But the biggest downer...
Just to orientate myself here, is this a side story to the shit happening, or is it happening at the same time, or is it happening a little bit earlier?
No, it's happening all at the same time. I think because I've now gone on this much more spiritual journey of really figuring out what's going on for me and also what's going on in the world at large, I was able to kind of see this much more objectively. So as it was happening, it was like, this is hard, this is painful at times. We're having some really hard conversations because, you know, when things are going well, everyone's happy, everyone's, you know, in a good mood and so on. When things aren't going so well, office conversations start happening and this starts happening, or everything comes down with it. And it takes a huge level of leadership to be able to turn around a ship that is being dragged down by something outside of itself, you know, and I wasn't capable of that. And I don't think within the organization we haven't created that level of kind of relatability and leadership and accountability and so on yet. And we've scaled incredibly quickly. Just unfortunately at that point, you know, perhaps scaled the wrong kind of business, which happens quite a lot. We're trying to imitate a kind of merchant bank type setup, and actually it could have been quite a lot simpler. So so while it's kind of all going on, I'm looking at it and I'm realizing this is going to be happening for a while. Our reputations were quite damaged at this point, and when we were trying to pitch to a new business, for example, and they said, well, have you done this before? And we go, yeah, but they then look at it and the stock price is doing this. It just isn't attractive to anyone. And selling the entire story, i.e. telling them, why things have happened the way they've happened, it's an uphill battle when the optics in the real world just look awful. And so basically nothing happened for like 2 years. We were just fighting uphill every single day, and we ended up getting into some really big challenges as well. Which we're now coming out the other end of, but they put you in I guess, well, for me anyway, I'm not in Singapore either, I'm in Europe, so they put me in that's where the head office for the private equity company is. They put me in a very kind of inward looking state, which enabled me just to kind of really clear the decks in life. And so probably from early 2017, we were all hustling quite a lot. We were trying to make a lot happen. We were trying to get new groups going. We were trying to save this one. We were trying to do all kinds of stuff, but it was all very sticky. It was like running through wet tar, hot tar. And so at the same time, I was really focusing on, I guess, myself and simplifying my life and figuring out how I can be more and more okay with all this. Like, I want to be happy. I think everyone just wants to be happy.
So there's a lot of relationship stuff happening there as well, huh?
Oh yeah, yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah. Well, 2016 was a really interesting year. So I'll share a little bit more about that too, because the beginning of 2016 was the hardest yet, because I'd done ayahuasca quite a lot at this point. One of the funniest cosmically times of my life, because within a 2-week period, at the beginning in February 2016, I had got news that my little brother had got cancer, which and I was in Singapore at the time, and that was kind of hard to stomach. But I also by this time I developed an understanding of what all disease in our bodies is. So this comes into what more of my life is about now. Whenever we create any kind of disease, it's basically a manifestation of a physical blockage and an emotional blockage. So, and it doesn't matter what it is. I don't care what anybody says. It doesn't matter what it is. It's all the same thing. It's just a different kind of manifestation of the same systemic issues. And so when I got the news about my brother, the kind of human physical side of me was very, very upset. Obviously, he's 2 years younger than me. So at the time he was 24, 25. And that should not be happening. He should, that sort of age, that shouldn't be happening. So that was quite hard to take as a kind of big brother. But at the same time, I was kind of laughing at it, and I was going, fuck, this is all, it has to be perfect. Something about this is going to be perfect. I don't know what it is yet, and I don't know how much of a lesson my brother's got to learn through this, but, it's happening to him for a reason, and he's got to take responsibility for something in his life that he's currently, avoiding. So this happened, and then literally a week later, I get back to the UK, and it's my birthday. And then my girlfriend at the time goes on a holiday over to the US. Happens when girlfriends and I go to the US, I'm sure. And she met somebody the night she arrived there, and got with him 3 days later, and then married him another week later. So 10 days start to finish. I'm still back in the UK in my 2-bed flat in Tunbridge Wells. And finding it, again, quite hard, because I realized, fucking hell, I've asked for another lesson in like the most dramatic, ridiculous way you can imagine. This doesn't happen to everyone. Their girlfriends don't fuck off and marry somebody just like this. This isn't normal. But I'm laughing at it at the same time. So I'm like in my flat, like, head in hands, crying, but giggling at the same time, hysterically, because I can see the ridiculousness of it. And it might sound ridiculous to somebody kind of listening to this, but I don't know, that something happens when you go on this journey, you realize everything's happening perfectly. And then even if it hurts, you're like, I'm supposed to learn something from it. So let's get to work on what there is to learn from this, as opposed to feeling shit about myself or whatever,
As an outsider, that was surreal to.
Oh, I'm
that
sure.
whole debacle.
Yeah.
I'm like,
God, I learned a lot.
I can only imagine what was going on through your own mind in that process.
Well, kind of just as I said, just a lot of pain. But the thing is, whenever we face anything in life, it's not about the thing that's happening. It's about where the pain's coming from. So, I don't know, if I said to you right now, if I was trying to insult you, Joss, and I said, you fucking kangaroo, it's like, there's nothing insulting about that, because you're like, well, I'm not a kangaroo. He's just kind of weird, so it's just me being weird, right? You don't feel any weirdness around that. You just go, that was odd. But if I say something that triggers you, like if I say something and you recognize some truth in it, and it triggers you in some way, then it has an entirely different impact on us, and it can make us very defensive, it can make us very aggressive, and so on. So whenever I have massive things in my life that bring up huge emotion, I've got to the stage now where I can observe the emotion for what it is. I realize, well, hold on, nothing's, like, I haven't caught this emotion. Like, there's nothing affected me. I haven't been infected. It's in me anyway. So I just need to kind of follow it back to where it's come from. So whenever we have these big emotional things, we just go, all right, that hurt, but this is just a symptom of me having this pain within me anyway. So I need to dig deeper. I need to figure out what the hell's going on within me so that I can release the what's causing this pain, and then not manifest the situations in life that are going to bring it up anyway. But even if I do manifest something, it'll be there as a reminder, and I'll be able to look at it in an entirely different way. And so I guess throughout all these crazy ass things happening, and then obviously 4 months later we have a massive business success followed by a massive business crash, and my own sort of personal net worth going into multiple 7 figures, and then back to fuck all again. It was like life's ridiculous. Like, life is supposed to be ridiculous, but hold on, if you can get a little bit more awareness than to need to be pinballed around by life so much, you can start putting cushions in place, and you can start actually aligning with who you are more and expressing that in the world more, so that it's more authentic and not going to really knock you off your center. And also you build something that's truly your own. So for me, I'd always kind of supported other people in building their visions. I'm coming into a phase now where finally, and perhaps I'm early, perhaps I'm late, but it feels like I'm really coming into a time in my life where I'm building something that is truly an expression of who I am. There's going to be a YouTube channel that comes along with that and so on. And a lot of this is just going to be more about psychology. And it's more about where psychology and spirituality meet, because I think there's so many academics in both spirituality and psychology. There's so many people giving quotes and there's so many people writing papers on things. But, I think the effect of implementation and the effect of being the integrated version of those things in the world is something that not that many people really go down the journey of. And more and more, it just feels like I want to be an example of what's possible. And doing that very recently with like my sort of physical transformation, lost about 30 kilos in a year, which has had not just a dramatic effect on, my weight and so on, but also on the way I look and the way that I look at the world and the way that the world looks at me. And everything changes when we just start looking at things differently. And I think that is kind of the overriding lesson really from like my life, which has been kind of nuts at times, is everything's a reflection of how you feel inside. Everything is a manifestation of what's truly going on for you inside. When we focus on that and give ourselves some space and time in life to give that like the attention it truly deserves, crazy stuff happens, magic happens.
So I think what's interesting about you almost come at things from a hyper spiritual element at times. Somebody who you wouldn't expect to be in such a high-powered business world at any point in their lives. But you also come from having a huge amount of experience within those worlds as well. So it's a massive juxtaposition, but it works.
Well, I think it's challenging because it feels like and I've gone from like, I remember one time I went into into an ayahuasca weekend, two ceremonies on a weekend, having literally just got off a plane from Singapore the day of the first ceremony, where for the last week I've been out every night entertaining people and so on. So that is definitely quite for anyone who has done any of these sorts of medicines, like you'll understand where you go on those journeys. So to come from very much the material, the matrix, if you like, I say that word not that lightly, I really mean it, in Singapore, to then coming and going truly on a surrender journey of myself and the cosmos, was kind of crazy. But well, Aya's quite gentle, as you know, so she gives us what we're capable of dealing with and also what we're prepared for. But the way I managed it was just knowing that these spiritual journeys were the truth. I got that from a very early stage. So my first ayahuasca journey was the most fucking mental thing I've ever done. Still to this day, nothing I've done since compares to it. I had 5 ego deaths in like 2 hours, like literal feeling like I killed myself. And it's literally a stripping away of certain levels of identity. So that's all it does, is it takes away from us what we no longer are and what we no longer have to be in life, and shows us what we can actually enroll within ourselves to live a more empowered existence, to live a more abundant existence, etc. And that first ayahuasca session just obliterated who I thought I was. Took me out into the cosmos and showed me what we all are, where we come from, the fact that we are all just love. And then it sucked me back into the world. And this is all in like 2-hour chunks. So the first 2 hours was horrendous. The second 2 hours, I was literally not in my body. I was floating in eternity, feeling the most amount of love I think I've ever, I couldn't possibly explain how amazing it felt. Followed by 2 hours being kind of back in the room and downloading. So I literally sat there for 2 hours having epiphany after epiphany after epiphany after epiphany after epiphany about things that were actually true, which is anything that's empowering. Anything that's empowering, you say to yourself, is the truth. Anything that's not empowering is just a lie that you're telling yourself. And I believe that, by the way, to the extent that I believe that if enough humans start to believe that we could fly, we could probably fly. It's just that there's not enough consciousness that's got there yet. But, one day maybe. I'm not, putting out there that we should be flying. But I genuinely don't believe there are any limits. It's not a thing that I see anymore, from my own experiences in life. I guess knowing that that's the truth, and then knowing that this was here to test me and to help me test the implementation of these truths. Like, if I go to these crazy places and learn these truths, how does that look in the real world, or in this world? I'm not going to say real world, but in this world. What does it look like implemented? And as I've gone on that journey, I've removed an awful lot from my life. I've created a lot more simplicity. I've invited in love that I've never experienced before, and support that I've never experienced before. And it's been literally all about coming back to the oneness that we all have within us. When we realize that we are everything that we could possibly need to be, and that everything's just there to teach us something. Like, you can't go wrong. Like, life just becomes a bit more of a playground. And sure, I still get a bit hung up on things every so often, and I still have, challenging conversations with people and all this kind of stuff. But the more I focus on this, the more I meditate on this, the more I create my days with this mentality, the more it just seems to keep validating itself. And yeah, I guess that kind of brings us to today. And yeah, life looks very different. I live in Vilnius in Lithuania right now. I'm actually moving to Thailand at the end of September, which again is a lifestyle choice. I'm nearly fruitarian now, so anyone who's kind of been on a health journey, the impact of fasting and the impact of understanding what a mucusless or mucus lean diet can do for your body in terms of healing, and therefore in terms of overall energy and spiritual connection, etc., etc., etc. Like, could go on for days and days and days about all this, is immeasurable. And having adopted this lifestyle now since I've been with my wonderful girlfriend, who's sitting opposite me over there, Alice, has been something that I've also had to then take on for myself. So, this was an awful lot of things that I associated with her and then had to really adopt for myself as well. So now this really is my way of living as well. And that's incredibly empowering. But when we start to remove blockages physically, we can't help but have the emotional releases that go with it, because they're both connected. And then if we give some attention to the emotional releases and observe the two working together, you can't go wrong. If you're working on the mind and working on the spiritual side whilst working on the physical, like, the impact of change is immensely dramatic. And what Alice and I are now focusing on is actually creating communities for people to experience this in their lives. And obviously, from my background, I want to work with a lot more sort of CEOs and entrepreneurs and so on, because I also understand the challenges of what it takes to grow businesses, and the various identity challenges that we have along this journey as well. And that's the biggest thing I think people really struggle with, is building things, getting to a certain point and then going, is this actually who I am? Like, is this what I want to be known for? Is this what I'm really about? Or am I something more than this? Have I got something actually going on within me? Maybe this is just a skill that I need to learn for something even bigger that I'm doing. And I just keep, I'm all about helping people find out what it is that they really should be doing, and then looking at their lives going, wow, all these skills that I've done, all these various things that I've done and learned from, they can help me with this. They don't have to be combating against it. And I think that's another way that I've managed to bridge big business with the spirituality stuff, is that I've seen it all for what it is. It's my experience. I'm not hiding from my experience. I'm not going to feel shy about it. I'm not going to feel shame towards it. It's all perfect. It was all exactly what it needed to be in order for me to get here. Are there things that I wish I could have done differently, or I could be more proud of? Sure. But those, again, only come from a place of lack. If I look back and go at the time, well, actually at the time, that was all my mind was capable of doing. I'm not who I am now. So, and again, I think this is something that a lot of people need to really look at for their own lives, is looking at all the experiences that they've had and evaluating what feelings they have around them, whether they're good or bad, what judgments we're placing on them, and therefore what meanings we're giving to them, because that will massively impact how we do show up in this world. So yeah, that's really, this is what I'm really passionate about. This is the stuff that I could talk for days on, because mindset and the understanding of why we do certain things and who we deeply are, and how to release more of what we really are, is fascinating to me, and it's something that I'm just going to be diving into more and more and more.
That is fascinating. Just to recap the last part of the story, what actually did happen to the group? Is it still existing, or did you manage to recover after the rush?
So we ended up realizing that as a board, we were probably not the most attractive board anymore. So certain people, obviously in the investor communities, had made certain assumptions about us, which we couldn't help at the time. And so we focused on building a new board for that company, which was always the plan anyway. We just did it obviously a lot sooner, having had this challenge to deal with. So that's now still operating with that existing board. They've also made it quite a lot more sophisticated, and it's being run by somebody that actually came to a Harbour Club to hear about us and to hear from Jeremy, which was quite interesting actually, because I was the first person he met when he walked in, and he just grilled me for like half an hour, which I wasn't quite ready for, but he knew what he wanted to get from us, and he knew the answers he needed. And by the end of the Harbour Club, he was all in. He said, "How do I work with you guys?" So that was obviously a nice validation as well. Yeah, he's a phenomenal guy, and he's brought a team around him that's really helping build some foundations into their future. They've changed their tack, put it that way, and they're now doing what they want to do. So we're now, so with Unity Group, we also now have another public company over in Germany, and we're actually doing a cap raise for that right now. It's got a number of assets already in it, so we've already just recently reversed a number of businesses into it. We're now doing a cap raise to help us scale to the next level, and the guys are actually all over in London next week for that. So I'm on the board of that. I'm no longer actually on the board of Unity Group. I decided to sort of step away from the day-to-day there, largely just because not being in Singapore, it's quite hard to kind of be too involved in the day-to-day. And also because everything had slowed down to such an extent, I was like, you know what, this is perhaps the opportunity that life has created for me to go back inside myself and create something more in alignment with who I am rapidly discovering I am and what I'm all about. So I've actually now come out here, we moved out here in January, and a big part of the move was my first business partner, James, who I met at the gym. We decided to kind of do something together again. And it's a little bit of an amalgamation of everything that we've both kind of been through. And it's kind of coming together in two ways. So James is a master with affiliate marketing, and marketing in general, actually. He has an agency over here that has quite a lot of the biggest businesses here as clients. And he also works with smaller companies that are looking for performance marketing, and they do it on a partially success basis, which is quite rare in the agency space. Not that many people backing themselves to that level. But James really knows his stuff, and to give you a little flavor, he did an ICO, which is the crypto equivalent, obviously, of an IPO, last year. Yeah, so he did 2 last year, as an agency working with coin creators. And the first one, they raised $37 million in 18 minutes. And basically it was a product launch formula. Nothing that Ryan Dice and all those internet marketing guys haven't done it 1,000 times. He just did exactly the same thing, but in the crypto space. And it worked a charm. So he did that again for another company in December, which wasn't the best time to do it, but they still raised their hard cap, which was 20 million. And so he's got an affiliate business going now, which is doing really quite well. And he's sort of adding some revenue streams and so on to that, which is going really, really well. And like I said, he's a bit of a maestro at that stuff. So it's kind of a pleasure to see him kind of just doing it and displaying it. And we also have a private equity company, which is a business that we've set up to take equity in businesses that we really love the owners of and really like the mission, purpose, and vision for. And then we leverage his skills and my skills in helping human beings, his skills in the marketing side and with the agency, to then scale those businesses.
Okay, so that's how you're working with him in order to do the marketing. You're really just mentoring the people who run the company.
To a degree, yeah, but that side of it hasn't really kicked off all that much yet. We've got a couple of businesses that we're now just doing the sort of online build-out side of it for. But because of the health and the spiritual side for me, and the realization of the impact that has on business owners' lives, I'm now focusing most of my time on helping Alice with her fasting group, which is called Fasting with Alice. But also then building a lifestyle brand around it. So we've created we're in the process of creating a sort of top co-organization to it called Fasted Life. And really what this is all about is helping people to truly understand the impact of working on the inside to affect the outside. Because it doesn't really matter what anyone's beliefs are if they experience it for themselves. they'll see it. And just because I've worked with so many sort of high level business people in the past, I'm starting to attract a few people who have created massive success in business and then just felt lost, and felt like they don't really know why they've done what they've done, or who they are because of it. A lot of people build a business which is very effective and creates a lot of financial reward, and then they get to the end of it and they live that sort of retired life, where they just live on a beach or live in the south of Spain for a while and all those sorts of things. And then they go, well, hold on, I'm not really contributing anymore. I'm just kind of being a bit of a rich bum, They realize there's not really any fulfillment in that. There's not really fulfillment in just money and the effects that money can bring. It's about what you're doing in the world and who you're showing up as and what you're able to contribute. So I'm giving some real attention to helping people in that situation. Or indeed people that have experienced major challenges or changes in life, at generally a slightly higher level. So, I've worked with people who've, inherited very, very large sums of money in the past, or had a business inheritance or something like that, where they've suddenly been thrust into a huge responsibility and a massive change in identity.
I was going to say a responsibility and identity shift, because you said you've gone through that shift yourself, that who are you now and where do you fit with everyone else, and you can't relate to the people that you maybe grew up with as much as you said.
I guess, it's an interesting question actually. I mean, there's been phases where I've really rejected people from my past because it's felt too challenging. The way they're living or their beliefs about the world are too challenging to mine. And in that moment, I've had to just remove myself from the effect of that, not necessarily a negative in the conflict in my own mind. But in hindsight, I say this completely honestly, I have nothing but kind of compassion for everyone and where they're at. And so, because I'm now able to sort of see where people are at and what challenges, just by, the language they use and so on, I can understand what's holding them back. It's really easy just to go, fucking love you, man. Like, you want to be there for them. You want to be more for them.
We had that chat the other day. We had that conversation the other day on our messenger. I think there's a lady that was in a place of a lot of pain, but how can I articulate this? You saw a lady that was in a lot of pain. You knew that something was going on with her, but you couldn't quite help her at that moment in time. But you knew something's up.
I mean, Facebook's a funny thing because imagine Facebook is basically you're walking down the street and someone says something down the street and you just hurl back your opinion at them. It's a really weird environment that we live in when a complete stranger comments on something that you've got a dialogue going with people and they give you their opinion, and it's like, oh, hold on, like, it doesn't really make any sense. And it's one of the kind of weird manifestations, if you like, of this world we live in right now, is that no depth is happening anywhere. So when somebody says something, this was about the post about the Cosmo cover with the rather large woman Jess, and I basically was saying, look, nothing against her, and I don't really care what her journey is. She's clearly challenged. If she's that significantly overweight, there's something going on inside her that's meaning that she needs all that as a shield in some way. But I'm not that concerned about that. What I am concerned about is the fact that this is being glamorized, and she's talking about it as like a glamorized way, and it's making people be okay with things that they probably shouldn't be okay with, like being obese. If you're obese, you should get some help. Like, whatever it is, whoever you are, just love yourself a little bit more. Find out what it is within yourself that you're not giving love to, and fucking give it some love. And so I was coming at it from that perspective and seeing the impact of glamorizing this on society at large. We live in a very strange social, political world where people's feelings are having laws made about them. So if you offend me in some way, just by being you and in the world, I can have a campaign for a law against you being in that way. And it's like, well, what the fuck, humans? Like, we've really missed a few marks here on the way up. And it's nothing but a manifestation of the confusion that's going on in the world right now. Everything's changing so quickly. No one really has a bloody clue what's going on. And so if you look at it a little bit more objectively, it's just the chaos that's happening before we genuinely as a race actually kind of evolve. We're going through a really big radical shift right now. Trump's fucking president. Like, that's weird. He's a crazy ass, blonde, big balloon man who everyone takes the piss out of, and yet he's, you know, the most powerful man in the world. And
yet sadly he's the same choice.
But it's
in some ways.
I mean, from the perspective of, you know, my understanding of it is, you know, he's just another symptom of the fact that we're going through some radical changes as a society. So the fact that he gets elected means that we're still very much stuck in that capitalist kind of mentality. And so all the, you know, figures for economics in the US that are going through the roof. Well, duh, he's a businessman. Of course he's going to help the company make more, the company, the country, Freudian slip, make more money. I mean, of course. But, you know, what do we do about that? What meaning do we associate to it? And we can get really offended by it. We can call him bigoted, and we can get all huffy about all the stuff that he does on social media. Or we can just see it for what it is, realize that we don't need to engage energy in it, and allow the change that's going on to happen. But when you have situations like an entire society creating okayness with mundanity and mediocrity, which society does anyway, but this is now getting extreme. We're now allowing significantly obese people to be seen as champions for not being afraid to be that in the world. I get it. And there's a big part of this that says, well, hold on a minute, we're actually just glorifying some really kind of challenging mental instability here. And the fact that, you know, she's been so reactive on social media in the past and so on is kind of reflective of that. You know, we don't react to something unless we feel some truth in it. We talked about that earlier. You know, whenever there's an emotional response to something, it's because in some way there's something going on there. So yeah,
this particular lady, polar opposite to it.
Yeah, and this particular lady on the thread was challenged by this way of looking at it, wasn't she? And I just in the end just said to her, look, you know, realizing that there's a huge amount of information that she doesn't have about our understanding of this whole situation. You know, the only real response you can have is, well, hey, listen, best of luck on your journey, and stay, you know, be well, because otherwise you're engaging with somebody you've got different levels of information. No, they're not ready for it, and there's too much that has to happen before they are going to be ready for it. And it's not our place to, like, fix people on the internet, you know, to jump in and go, right, no, you're wrong because of this, and this. I've been so guilty of that in the past, trying to correct people, actually. But, you know, everyone is going to be where they're at when they comment on Facebook. Like, let them be, you know.
I think what you're doing is, where I see you potentially going here with what you're talking to me about is helping people on that journey, but in a different way, that they're coming to you because of, lack of a better word, the attractive character that you kind of bring out this, hey, it's all love, here's what I'm doing, here's what effect it's having with me, it's the effect it's having on the people around me and society in general.
I think more and more I just want to dive into the dark stuff, you know. I want to dive into the challenge, I want to dive into the identity of whatever it is that's kind of coming through, and then just display it. But because I'm doing it and Kerwin Ray, I think, who you follow as well, Kerwin Ray talks about this a lot. He talks about the ability to go through something with objectivity. So kind of like I experienced the massive highs and lows in 2016 with the business. And yes, I was experiencing it, but I was also looking at it for what it was and seeing it for the fact that it was clearly just here to teach me a bunch of stuff that I hadn't yet learned. And because I've got kind of grandiose visions for life and grandiose visions, I think we're all capable of magic and amazing things in this world. And that includes myself. So I know that I'm here for something great. I'm discovering my way there, and it's more and more coming out of me. And so seeing things for what they really are, and instead of reacting to it so much, but taking on the lessons of it, has allowed me to then do the same with losing a lot of body weight. It's allowed me to do the same with shifting identity in terms of being more loving in the world and having more love shown back. It's allowed me to do it. It's allowed me to do it in a lot of ways, and I can do it with business people really easily now, because you'll probably know this. You can be in some meetings with somebody who's perhaps a little old school in business or something, and they come at you with some weird aggression or some weird angle or some weird energy. And it allows me just to go, hey, listen, wherever you're coming from, it's all good. And I'm not sort of judging you for it, but this feels really weird, and I'm not very comfortable here. You're kind of putting on quite a strange kind of vibe into this energy. I'm not blaming you for it, but I would like you to take responsibility for kind of how you're displaying yourself a little bit now, so that together we can move on to having a great conversation and like talking about what it is that we're here to talk about. But first, why don't we just get to know each other a little bit? Because I find in my experience, when we have conversations with people about real stuff, family, their stories, their challenges, what's real to them, what's made an impact in their lives, we get to know each other a lot better, and we get to be able to relate together a lot better. And then we're going to naturally have a much better business conversation. So really my angle with all this is that I love business and I love creating things with people, but I want to work with people who've really gone there inside themselves, people who aren't so reactive and are quite happy just being who they are in the world and allowing that expression to attract the right people to them. I don't see that much sense in trying to force things otherwise, and we all try and do these deals or, yeah man, it looks so obvious that we should work together. Let's make it happen. And that whole kind of approach of let's make it happen, it's like, it never will.
That's a fantastic reframe. Just the way that you move that conversation in a non-aggressive way.
I guess it's just come because I've felt on the other end of so many people that have tried to bring that at me. It's like, oh, why again? Like, let's diffuse this as quickly as we can.
I really appreciate about you. You've got a way of articulating. So, where did that come from? You said you, I guess, became articulate at one point. Is that something you actively worked on? Did you discover it, or just a passive knowledge from the people you're around?
I'm going to say there's a number of contributing factors. That's a really interesting question. The first of which is, I guess, some of it comes from just being quite educated. I went to a private school, so articulation and vocabulary were quite wide around me, but I never felt very bright, so I probably didn't learn all that much at the time. But the effect of growing up in a sort of middle class sort of environment kind of gave me a bit of that. But then I learned. So I went through a bit of a breakup when I was 21, which was my first proper serious breakup, and it fucking crippled me. I didn't know how to be in the world, like nothing made sense. But at the same time, I was very aware that this wasn't a good thing. So I was looking for answers, and that's when I kind of stumbled into personal development. And I guess being in personal development makes you question a lot. It doesn't necessarily help you find a lot of the answers, because I think personal development, a lot of that stuff can be a little bit superficial, and until you really go on a bit more of a spiritual journey, a lot of it you won't be able to cognize it for yourself and therefore live it. It's just an intellectual wank, to be perfectly honest, which we all know a lot of people that do a lot of, and we've probably both done a lot of in our times as well. You read a lot of stuff and, fucking hell, I should be implementing that. We never do, it's just classic human condition. So I definitely learned a lot just by asking a lot more questions. And then I think just the spiritual side of it. And also, and I say this quite candidly as well, I do smoke marijuana sometimes. And that has been, it's very conflicting, because a lot of people in the Western world, unless you're in the States obviously, but a lot of Europe and so on, it's sort of frowned upon, especially in the UK, especially in Mayfair and in the city and stuff. One of these guys watches this and they hear this, they're going to be challenging it. But I don't really care. The fact is that all of these things, whether it's ayahuasca, marijuana, whatever it is, they're all here to help us, and they all have messages for us. So as long as we don't allow something to become too much of a habit, and we don't allow it to have control over us, it has huge amounts of information to teach us, and huge amounts to teach us about who we are. And so I guess I'm one of the strangest people who smokes weed in the world, because I use it I certainly did a lot more when I started, and since I did ayahuasca even more so, it changed its meaning completely when I did Aya. It's something that helps me tune into alternate realities that allow me to go, I could actually look at that and do that in a different way. Then all I have to do is wake up in the morning and go and do it in a different way, and it doesn't feel like a challenge anymore. It doesn't feel like, hold on, I'm two different people. It just feels like I'm tapping into someone else in my mind that's able to receive some new information and then implement it. So I guess a combination of the upbringing and the school I went to, being involved in Mayfair definitely, and talking multi-billions with random people all the time, as well as the spiritual side has really helped kind of, get stuff out sometimes.
Amazing. I think, final question for you. If people do want to connect further and really dig into this reality creating and be a part of the next phase of your journey, where can they do that? How can they connect with you, connect with Alice, and just support you on your journey?
Yeah. Well, the only real way at the moment is through Facebook. We're literally building all the kind of online infrastructure and so on as we speak. So Alice's group is called Fasting with Alice. There's loads and loads and loads of information in there and loads of videos of all things to do with health, vitality, and truly living in a higher plane of existence when life feels much more in flow and a lot more effortless. Because you've removed a lot of the internal conflicts. There's a lot of information in there about loads of tools and ways in which that can happen, and it's all centered around fasting as a base practice. I'm on Facebook as well, but I think I'm at the 5,000 limit, so it's probably not the best place to get in touch. But yeah, if anyone's kind of genuinely interested and wants to get in touch, toby@becoming.group is my email. Yeah, just look out for Fasted Life. Fasted.life is going to be the domain. And that's going to be a kind of a membership area or a community area where we start to really share an awful lot of what we've been learning over life, really. Yeah, all sorts of stuff in there. So,
thank you, Toby. I'll say thank you. I appreciate you. This has been amazing. I have a lot of value out of this call myself. I'm sure our listeners will as well. If you guys go join his group, Toby, I think, given his experiences and given where he's at right now, will be on an amazing journey next few years. I think we all should connect with him now and continue to support him on his journey. And again, wish you all the best of luck as this progresses.
Thank you, man. Really appreciate it. And thanks so much for having me again.
Most welcome. All right, guys, we'll see you all in the next episode.